Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment, and that's going to be Andy Swan, the co-founder of LikeFolio.com. Thanks for joining us today, Andy.
Hey, nice to be here. Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday is right. So we're talking Airbnb. You've seen a real pickup, a solid pickup in a lot of the travel companies, the airlines so far in 2022. Cruise lines are even higher on the year, kind of leading the overall market. It seems like the expectations for travel are really starting to ramp up here, Andy. What are you seeing as far as data goes and Airbnb ahead of their earnings?
Yeah, I think expectations are ramping up for a very good reason. There's a lot of pent-up demand for travel. There's a lot of people that have been kind of sitting on the sidelines or taking small road trips throughout the pandemic that are ready to get away, and we see it when we look at a lot of these travel companies on a year-over-year basis against each other from a consumer demand perspective. We see the aggregator booking sites really leading the charge with hotel chains and Airbnb showing pretty strong growth year over year. And what's really interesting about Airbnb's growth, when we see consumer demand growth for Airbnb keeping up with or pretty close to the hotel chains, I think that's a really good sign on a year over year basis because, this was one of those companies, Airbnb, that kind of in its own way benefited from the pandemic in some ways because a lot of people were looking to get away. They wanted to be able to go somewhere where they knew that they had, control of the house and the property. They weren't going to be subject to specific rules or exposed to different things like they might at a hotel chain. So for Airbnb to put up year-over-year numbers similar to some of the hotel chains, I think is a really good sign. And the chart you're seeing right now shows, this current quarter also showing pacing for really good year-over-year demand growth as well, which tells me that the company has a really good chance of coming into this earnings call with some optimism, with a cautiously optimistic outlook for 2022, I think is the way that we're going to hear about Airbnb. And I think, the overall message here is the consumer is ready to get back to travel. And Airbnb is holding its own against competitors in a really nice way. And so I think 2022, we're going to see this continue to accelerate as virus concerns start to melt away, people start to make their spring and summer plans. I think that 2022 could be the year of a resurgent consumer in the travel space.
Andy, my question for you and discussion topic here is pretty simple stuff. This is a massive space, right, with unbelievable amounts of revenue involved in travel. And Airbnb is really a facilitator of travel. They don't own any of these places, right? They facilitate people renting other people's homes, and they take something off the top. I've used them. And is this a company has an unbelievable opportunity that got sidetracked by a once-in-a-century pandemic and really is on the verge of breaking out as a company because they seem to have a business model that fits perfectly into the world we live in, and they just need the world that we live in to go back to where it was. Am I off base here, or does this company look like it is primed to do extremely well over the long haul?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. It's very interesting when a company that is so innovative, comes out with this kind of idea. I mean, I remember when I first heard about Airbnb when they were, maybe raising private capital and thinking, man, I don't know about letting people stay in my house or staying in someone else's house. The narrative was kind of all wrong. We didn't see through to the vision that the company had. And now I think you're absolutely right. This is a company that has built really a new niche in travel, in the vacation space. It's starting to bleed over into some business travel, and they have a moat around themselves that they have built. I think it's an exceptional story. I think that as the world comes back to them, they'll be in really good shape. And another thing I like to point out is this is a company that, the travel wasn't up like it could have been last year or the year before, because of the pandemic, but people did, for the first time, rent Airbnbs because a lot of hotels and different things were closed. And so now they have that app. The company has that contact information. And so through the pandemic, they were able to actually expand their user base. And that's a big deal as you go into the spring and summer of 2022 when people are looking to get away.
Yeah, and Andy, that kind of hits on my point here. And Kevin mentioned, the forward-looking ramp-up that we saw due to the pandemic, right, where people didn't want to be in a hotel, right? You wanted to be in a house, you had control, it was clean, and you could avoid people but still be away from your house. Now, with the demand that's pent up for people to travel, and you're seeing it in a lot of the hotel stocks, they're just below all-time highs on a bunch of them, Marriott and Hyatt and Hilton and such, that'll get dragged away from Airbnb a little bit more as people are comfortable where, hey, I don't need to wear a mask anymore, or they've lowered maybe some of the guidance in a lot of these hotels, and I want to go to that hotel restaurant, and I want to experience the city as opposed to, being up in central Wisconsin at an Airbnb or something like along those lines, where they might eat their lunch a little bit more now that the pandemic's going to get through, and people aren't as concerned about the mask wearing and the mandates anymore.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a factor. It's definitely a risk factor, especially in the short term. The snapback to hotels you would expect to be much faster than Airbnb because they were so restricted. But from a data perspective, that's why I'm pretty excited to see Airbnb with a 24% year-over-year increase in consumer demand growth, according to LikeFolio data. When you've got some of the hotel chains at 40, 28, and even negative growth rates. So I think they're hanging in there better than people expect, and I think that's a really good sign for this company as we get into 2022. Because I'm with you, I kind of expected people to really shift away a little more from Airbnb than they are, but they're hanging right in there, and I think that the executives have reason to be optimistic.
Kevin, did you have a follow-up here, one for Andy?
Just something on your data, Andy, when you look at Airbnb and you compare it to all these others, how does it compare to like a firm like Expedia, where basically you can book anything? And how does an Airbnb compare to something like that? Obviously, Expedia has run to all-time highs, like Tom said. Some of the hotels are trading all-time highs. Airbnb's not there yet because it is a different experience than checking into a hotel or traveling a different way. Does it take some evolution of the U.S. traveler or traveler in general for this to slowly but surely catch up to some of these companies that are clearly surging back quicker than it has?
Yeah, I think its strength last year is becoming a little bit of a negative for it when you're looking at comps. I mean, compared to Booking or Expedia, the snapback in those has been phenomenal, almost double on a year-over-year basis in terms of consumer demand. But I will say, from a long-term perspective, the happiness level of Airbnb customers is 66%, which doesn't sound that high, but in the travel industry, that's very, very high. Expedia's at 57%, Booking's at 50%. So they're making consumers happier than their competitors. And in the long term, we've seen that play out really, really well for these companies. So I think this is one I'm definitely keeping a strong eye on. I can't wait for the earnings report.
Yeah, and Andy, out of LikeFolio, based on your data, are you guys giving this an earnings score going into this report?
Yeah, I'm bullish on it. I think they've got good data and they've got a good story to tell, and I think the market's ready for that right now.
Awesome, great stuff as always, Andy. Have a great day.
You too.
All right, that's Andy Swan, a co-founder of LikeFolio.com, joining us to break down the data on Airbnb. But